Dashing Dan's Olympic adventures for another week, and we're here for Aussie Home Loans to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city, plenty of areas of expertise, including debt consolidation, cash out construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans, and personal loans. Today's guest is a trailblazer when it comes to female sports reporting. 13 Olympic Games, about to go to her 14th in Paris. She was a big part of what the ABC did and probably helped transform the way ABC radio covered the Olympic Games. And she did an outstanding job with that and has had a brilliant career since leaving the ABC and then coming back to the ABC. It is in many ways the incomparable Tracey Holmes. Tracey, welcome to the program. Great to have you with us.
Oh, look, thanks so much for asking me, and really great to talk to you. It's been a while.
It certainly has. Look, it's been a mighty career. 13 Olympic Games, winter and summer. Why do you love the Olympics so much?
Look, why do I love the Olympics so much? Because it's so big. It's the only place on the planet in any kind of environment where the entire world comes together. So not even at the United Nations are there as many countries gathered in one place. And so not only are there more countries gathering at the Olympic Games than in any other place, but you get to see the best of humanity. You get to see a whole lot of people who are really driven, really goal-setting driven people that want to achieve and want to get the best out of themselves. We also see some of the negatives, you know, and I don't need to explain what they are. We see some of the politics that can get ugly. We see doping that can be awful and can upset entire events. But in all of that, that's the story of the world. And that's what I love about the Olympics, that it has every story of the world contained in one spot, in one time, for this fortnight of humanity.
Years ago, it was a real battle to see who would be the city to win the Olympic Games, and they used to do it 7 or 8 years out. And we'll never forget Sydney and how delighted they were when in 1993 they were awarded the Games for 2000. Now it seems to be, if you want it, you can have it. Are you worried about the future of it?
No, I'm not worried about the future. Many people are, and I think there's like 100+ people that are employed at the IOC in Lausanne to worry about those sorts of things. And I think they're actually doing a pretty good job. I think they've improved a lot in the years that I've been reporting the Olympic Games, because the world has changed so much. And if the International Olympic Committee didn't change with it, they were in danger of being left behind. And, you know, one of the things I always come back to is that since the modern Olympics were reborn in 1896, they've been there. This is 120-something years of the Olympic movement. In that time, plenty of governments have come and gone. Plenty of countries have come and gone. You know, borders have changed. Much in the world has changed. You look at amateurism versus professionalism. You look at where we are today with regard to, you know, medicine and space travel and AI and everything that changes, social media, and the Olympics has been there throughout. I mean, that's quite remarkable that they've survived so many incarnations, and they're still there, and they're still looking at the future and very cognizant of the fact that the next generations coming through are always going to be different to the ones that came before, and they need to keep up with that. So it's a huge beast, and it can sometimes be very slow to maneuver, like, you know, like the Titanic, but they are looking at these things, and they are ever conscious of the fact that if they are to remain relevant, there's big questions they need to ask themselves about how that's done. But equally so, you know, plenty of people want to use the Olympics as a political kind of stage because it's the greatest stage on Earth. It's the one time that the whole planet kind of tunes in. And so, you know, people want to use it for all sorts of things. People call for boycotts all the time. People want some countries expelled and not others. And then you've got the other side to that argument. And like, if they listen to all of that, there'd probably be nobody left to participate in the Games other than maybe Commonwealth countries. And gee, we've seen how well the Commonwealth Games have been going recently, haven't we? Yeah, so I think they have a big job, and they do try and stay on top of it. But, you know, I'm glad it's them doing it, not me.
I agree, Trace. Do you think the biggest cities are the ones best equipped. And are you concerned about Brisbane in 2032? Because we have this impasse about whether a new stadium needs to be built or not, or do they just virtually bulldoze the Gabba and start again?
Well, we can look at Paris as an example, which we're on the eve of right now. I think Paris had 95% of the facilities that they're going to use were already there. So it was just a question of how do we kind of, slightly modernize them or get everything ready. And so Brisbane, when you look at Brisbane, I think people forget sometimes that the reason cities bid to host an Olympic Games is not just to stage a 2-week sporting event.
No.
They host an Olympic Games. Sydney did the same thing because they want to revitalise a city. They want to improve certain areas of a city. They know that a city's future depends on growth. And so it's a way of speeding up that whole kind of infrastructure to get it all done for the next phase of growth in a short amount of time in what might otherwise take decades, because everything always has to be done with the approval of the people. We live in a democracy, and governments rise and fall on those sorts of decisions. And so by having the Olympic Games, it kind of gives the population a positive goal of their own to go, yep, great, we've got the Olympics. Yeah, of course we want that high-speed rail, or we want that new stadium, or we want whatever. And so they can try and rush that through. But then what we're seeing with Brisbane is that the runway can be a little too long, perhaps. So for most cities, it's been around 7 years. Sydney had 7 years to prepare and build and get everything ready for the city to revitalise parts of Sydney that had pretty much been industrial wastelands.
Yes.
They're kind of forgotten sludge area. They cleaned it up. People now live there. We've got the Olympic facilities that are used, 365 days of the year and host some of the big events, big concerts, everything else. It really did change the shape of Sydney. And so Brisbane is looking at doing the same thing. And every city that is bidding is looking to do the same thing. But the IOC has also, since Thomas Barker's come in as president in the last decade and a half, they've kind of looked at pulling things back and using facilities that are there and only building what is absolutely necessary rather than building everything that is necessary if you've got a blank slate. So they're trying to make them more, sustainable. They're looking at things like climate change and how that impacts on certain sports and whether we're considering that. They look at, like Paris is saying, we want no plastic bottles. We don't want plastics anymore. Plastics are polluting the earth. So, bring a hard container and we'll provide taps all around the city where you can fill up with clean water. So that's one of their sustainability programs. So, they've changed over time. And I think they're conscious of looking at ways of keeping them not just relevant, but important and helping to drive the positive changes that cities and populations need.
Esteemed sports broadcaster Tracey Holmes heading off to her 7th Summer Olympics in Paris, and she's been also to 6 Winter Olympics as well. Has joined me on Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures to deal with anyone in Australia. They've got clients in every state and capital city. And like what Tracey and I are doing, they do Zoom as well. So 1992 was your start. What was it like the first one?
Well, it was fantastic. I was so much younger then, and to think that I was one of the young members of the ABC team heading off to Barcelona, it was thrilling. It was really wonderful. And I guess just to have that experience of being part of the world. You walk into a main press centre or you walk into the International Broadcast Centre, and there are broadcasters and media journalists from everywhere, and they have press conferences every day. The IOC has a press conference detailing all of the issues of the day and how they're dealing with them. And then you head off to the venues and there's all the world competing. And I mean, it's quite remarkable. I was only earlier today listening to someone who himself had been an Olympian competing in water polo through the 80s and into the early 90s. And he was saying how remarkable it is that you have this situation before the opening ceremony and all the athletes of the world who want to march are there. and they're all kept in this great big venue. They're given some food and drink, and you've got to wait, of course, until, you know, your name is called in alphabetical order according to what the name of your country is.
Yeah.
And he said the potential for that to be, you know, politically charged or for some sort of incident or violence or like anything to take place is pretty big. But actually, it never does. You know, keep your fingers crossed. But the whole world is there. And he said it's the only place, for example, where you can sit down in the athlete's village to have a meal and the person sitting opposite you is from North Korea. When else does an Australian get to share a meal and have a conversation with a North Korean? And you'd have to think that, you know, these two people have barely anything in common. And yet what they do have in common is their love of sport, is their humanity. So there's a starting point to begin a conversation in understanding each other. And the whole idea of the games was that in the youth of the world coming together like that, and then going home with these experiences, they can share with their people that, you know, those people that we sometimes think really badly of, well, maybe they're just like us after all, and that these sorts of mini conversations have the opportunity to be taken back to each person's home and to kind of sprout new ways of thinking.
When you got there, were you thinking, wow, I mean, this is surreal?
Yeah, of course.
All these different people?
Yeah, yeah, of course. I mean, I'd kind of been fortunate in that I was lucky enough to be born into a family of surfers. My mum and dad were surfers.
Right.
And so as a young kid, I travelled around the world, sitting on the beach, exploring different countries, different places, different people. And so I had had my introduction to the world at a pretty young age. And I knew then that that's what I wanted to continue to do as I grew up. And in fact, that's where I started, you know, talking to people. I'll talk to anybody, anywhere. Some of the greatest stories I've ever had is because I've just started talking to someone sitting next to me on a bus or whatever.
Yes.
And so, you know, the world of sport gives you that. And so when I was lucky enough to start at the ABC, and I began there in 89, so I'd been there about 3 years when, you know, the applications kind of went out, not really applications, but they were taking expressions of interest of who might want to be included on the team. And of course, I'd been putting my hand up already for 3 years to be chosen for everything because I just wanted to get to it.
Yes.
And so when I was picked as part of that 92 team, yeah, I was pretty chuffed, and I enjoyed every single moment. Like, it's hard work. And Olympic Games is really hard work. And I think I'm one of those people who just works all the time anyway. Ask my kids, ask my husband. I just work nonstop because I really love it. But, you know, you get there and you kind of think there's no end to these stories. You could stay up 24/7 and you'd be finding new stories to tell. And so the difficulty is to not kind of give into that and then collapse halfway through because you're so worn out. And I guess it's like an athlete, you know, kind of building and making sure they taper and getting prepared and match ready. It's the same for the media because it's a huge task.
You hosted in 1996, and in 1996, if my memory serves me right, Tracey, was where Alan Marks, the ingenious, and I worked with him as well at a couple of Olympic Games, executive producer of the Olympics coverage, came up with a different way of doing it, probably a more cost-efficient way of doing it, where you do it off the screen. A few of our commentators, one, the great Graham Smokey Dawson, used to pretend he was getting in a jet to go from San Diego to Atlanta to call a soccer match. I'll never forget. He said that to you one day, Trace, and you said the jet's waiting for you, Smoke, just outside. But of course, most of it was off tube, bar a few of the main events. And that worked a treat, didn't it? And for many, many years, that was the staple diet of how we at the ABC did it, and did it well. And you were right behind that in 1996 as the host.
Yeah, that's right. It was like that. So a lot of the stuff just coming out of the International Broadcast Centre, you know, saved a huge cost. But you were still predominantly in the city. Yeah. So you still got the sense and the feel of the city and what was happening around the place. Whereas now, you know, you look at Channel 9 and how a lot of their stuff from Paris will be done. It'll be from a studio in Melbourne. And that's really hard. I've done a couple of, I did a Commonwealth Games like that for Foxtel, and, you know, sitting in a studio at North Ryde is not the same as actually being at the Commonwealth Games in India, because you're not getting the sense of how the locals are responding to that, what the visitors are thinking being in these places for sometimes the first time, and their exposure to those cultural differences. So it's kind of getting that balance right. And I think in 96, we did have that balance right at the ABC. And it still enabled you, when you finished your shift, to go out and experience something of the games that you could then bring back to your commentary. Because what a lot of people don't realise is that with all of these major events, FIFA World Cup, Olympic Games, what have you, every commentary position that you book in a stadium costs a lot of money, because, as you can imagine, there's short supply and big demand. And so people will pay exorbitant amounts of money to be there in a commentary position, you know, to see the end of a race or the end of a game, or you know, great access to a court or any field of play. And so by kind of reducing the number of positions you needed for that, it enabled to give you more money or access to a greater portion of the budget for the big events. Always for Australia, swimming is a big event. You want to be at the pool. You know, always track and field is a big event. You've got the 100 metres men and women, you know, several other events that are real blue ribbon events at the Olympic Games. You want to be at the crack. But by pulling back on some of the other events and still doing a great commentary, but from the broadcast centre, it kind of added to the coverage overall.
And I think too, Tracey, and Tracey Holmes has joined me for Dashing Down's Olympic Adventures for Aussie Home Loans. One of the other great things was, if there was an Australian competitor in one of the low-profile sports that sort of came from nowhere. I remember in 2000, I was told by Glenn Mitchell to learn every minor sport, and I had a dossier in every minor sport. And Peter Mitchell was told at the last minute, Peter Wilkins was told at the last minute, don't worry about doing the soccer, do the archery. Simon Fairweather's about to win. He said, who's he? So Longo got me to get all the notes and everything. So when you're in the studio, you can just go from sport to sport. And if Australia's going well in a sport we don't know much about, George Griliusic, of course, we'll all remember 1992 at Barcelona, you can do that. That's the beauty of the way it was set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it enables you to sit there with your bank of cameras to be able to see everything that's going on everywhere, and to be able to pick those moments exactly as you say. I'm glad you brought up Smokey Dawson, because I met him in the coverage in Barcelona in 92. And at the end of the fortnight, I had really worked my butt off, as had everybody who was in the team. And Alan Marks said, we've got 2 tickets for the closing ceremony, and I'm going to give them to Tracey Holmes and Smokey Dawson. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought I'd get to go. So that's great. So we went, and as you know, the closing ceremony is a bit different to the opening ceremony. So the opening ceremony, it's all about the flags and the nations and everyone marches in. Closing ceremony, and it's a tradition that started in Melbourne 1956, where there was a young Chinese guy living in Melbourne who stood outside one of the television stores and was watching the opening ceremony on the television screens in the shop window, because not many people had TV then. Right. And he was watching and he thought, right, why are they all marching in countries like that? It shouldn't be political. If it's about the youth of the world and everyone coming together to celebrate, why don't they just kind of come in together as a mass? And so he wrote to the IOC. Wow. His name was John Ian Wing. And he said, why don't you, at a closing ceremony, why don't you all just come in together? Like, forget about this kind of separating. And they accepted it. And so they'd been doing that. So when we got to Barcelona, Smokey and I are sitting there at the closing ceremony, and it was fantastic. I mean, the energy was just amazing, but there were security guards kind of based at the end of each, row. And I had, what was a mobile phone then, a cell phone, not like this today. It was like a briefcase, and it weighed an absolute ton because I had to, lift the thing up and dial in and do some news reports while I was there. Yeah. Anyway, so when it came time for the athletes to head off into the middle of the arena, they came running down through the aisles where we were sitting. Wow. And I said to Smokey, let's go. They're not going to know if we're not an athlete. We can run onto the middle of the stadium with them. And he's like, no freaking way I'm doing that. Have you seen these guards here? They got guns. I'm not, no way. I said, okay, see you later.
Oh, you did it, Trace.
I took off.
Oh,
And I had the brick of a phone with me, and I had to file a report for, back in Australia, the main news at 7:45 a.m. And so
right.
I've dialed in, and I'm standing there, and here's all the athletes of the world, great basketballers and swimmers and everybody. They're walking around and they're having a great time. It's like, this is wonderful. So I picked up the phone and called in, and the producer back in Sydney was saying to me, oh, look, there's a lot of background noise. It's a bit noisy. Can you go somewhere quieter? I said, I'm in the middle of the closing ceremony of the Olympic Games. No, it doesn't get quieter. This is called atmosphere. It's amazing. And so that's where I did my radio report.
And they were happy with it, I take it, even the producer.
Well, they played it.
Excellent. Well, what did Smokey do? He just sat there, did he?
He just sat there. I gave him a wave back up in the crowd, like, you've missed your opportunity.
Well, it's not like Smokey not wanting to be the centre of attention, Tracey. You and I both know him very, very well. Can I just mention George? Were you around when George was doing the boxing? And then Marksy's gone to him and said, I think we're a big chance of winning the equestrian team event with Matthew Ryan and Andrew Hoy and Gillian Ralston. And George is calling the boxing with Benny Pike. And at the same time, he's learning. Can you believe this? He is learning the course for the equestrian, knowing that Matthew Ryan still had to ride Khyber TikTok. I mean, that's extraordinary, isn't it?
Extraordinary. And it's one of the great commentary audio segments. Absolutely amazing. George Grilizic, and a lot of people say, oh, how'd you get on with George? He was a bit of a misogynist. He was this, he was that. It's like, people don't actually know that I joined the ABC thanks to George Grilizic.
Really?
And I'd been working for the Australian Bicentennial Authority in '88. And we had, I was a publicist for the sports program. It was called Sport 88. And we had 2,500 events that happened around Australia over that year. And so I kind of look at the events where some media weren't going to go, because the media had to pick and choose. There were that many things to go to. And so I generally picked some of the smaller events that I knew the media wouldn't get to. And I'd go along, and then I'd phone everybody and say, do you want to report on this? And like the ABC always took one, Macquarie Network always took one. I always filed something for AP. So at the end of that year, quite a lot of the broadcasters and the papers knew who I was and what I did, and that I love sport. Anyway, I got a call from George, and he said to me, "G'day, Tracey. My name's George Grilizic." I'm like, all right. And he said, "You've done a couple of reports for us over the year." I said, yeah, I have done.
Beautiful takeoff, Trace, too. Magnificent. I'm telling you, Trace, I'm telling you.
I'm telling you. And he said, look, we've got a couple of spots for broadcast trainees at the ABC to learn to be commentators. Would you be interested? I said, oh, yeah, I'd be interested. He said, righto, Trace, you got to send your application in here. Anyway, so I sent it in. I got an interview, and I got one of the training positions. And George was always a bit of a favourite of mine, a bit of a go-to. Yes. And, people say things like, you can't be what you can't see. I kind of don't believe that. I think you can't be what you can't imagine. And so what you have to do is imagine yourself, doing certain things. But on top of that, every single person that comes across your path, you can learn from, right? I'm never going to be George Grilizic. I don't want to be George Grilizic, but I certainly want to be able to tell a story and portray the drama in a way that George was so masterful at. I mean, he was a great commentator, and I learned so much from George.
So Sydney 2000, again, was a different event. You were doing a different role by then. I mean, how different was Sydney, you think, Trace, to the first two you'd been to in regard to an event and the fact it was a home Olympic Games?
Yeah, there's nothing like a home Olympic Games. That's what athletes always tell you. Traditionally, the home nation does really well because they soak up all of that support from, the stadiums and the venues and the fans and just the atmosphere in the street even. And for a long time, people said that Sydney was the greatest games ever because the people in the country and particularly in the city had embraced it so well and were so happy. You know, the city was such a happy place and gods shone down because it was the most perfect weather for an Olympic Games for those 2 weeks as well. Yeah. And so everyone that came here as a visitor really enjoyed it. And, you know, you feel kind of proud that your country and your city had done so well in putting on such a good show for everybody. And one of the key differences for Sydney, and I think compared to every games that came before then, and this is also quite unique to Australia, and many sporting events have done it since, from World Cup cricket to, soccer to everything. And that is, they realised that for every country coming to compete here, there was a community. We've got people from every country living here.
Correct.
And so a lot of work was put into connecting the visiting teams that were coming with that community in Australia. So everybody felt like they had some support, and people that had come into Australia and, you know, were finding their way in a new country, in a new community, felt like they were being hosts in their new country, you know, for this team that was coming over, whether it was from Senegal or Sudan or Egypt or pick anything. And so that was a really great way of bringing everybody together, a very different way, and everybody was included in that. And I think that was really remarkable, and that kind of changed the way that it was done from then on.
What was your role in Sydney? You were involved with the actual Olympic Games organising committee, were you not, in some capacity?
Yeah, so I left the ABC in 97 and I joined the organising committee. And so I was the media information manager for a period of time. And, you know, no secret to say that I ended up not getting on very well with the Olympics minister. And I decided I couldn't work there anymore. So I left, and it was really hard to leave because I really loved, first of all, just experiencing what it was like to work for an organising committee and just seeing the layer upon layer upon layer of this great big machine that had to be built and fit together. And, you know, that you can't sort of extend the deadline. You can't overrun. You can't miss the opening ceremony.
No.
The planning and preparation is phenomenal. There's so much work. And the people that were working there, oh my gosh, they work so hard. And the organisation grows, you know, from a very small number of people, like we're seeing in Beijing at the moment, to the time of delivery, there's over 1,000 people that work for the organising committee. And then you've got this, you know, volunteer workforce, the volunteers that are like an army in themselves. And the volunteers in Sydney were fantastic. There were like 70,000 of them. Former very senior army guy, David Brittell, ran the volunteer program. And that was just one of the great legacies as well, because we've got a strong tradition in volunteering. So it was learning about all of that and seeing how the machinery worked. So I loved that. Then I left the organising committee and went to work at Channel 7. And 7 were the rights holders. And I did a program there at the time called The Games. I was the anchor of that. And then ended up leaving Channel 7 shortly before the Olympics. And I covered the Olympics for the Macquarie Network. I did a program with Peter Fitzsimons, who some people might know as, you know, former Wallaby and now journalist with Sydney Morning Herald, Fairfax Papers.
So there are a number of different roles there. Did you enjoy all of them? I mean, as you said, you obviously had an issue with the, unfortunately, can I ask you this question? You don't have to answer it, but was the Olympics minister a bit too hands-on when he had so many other people that could have helped him do a bit more work and he could have delegated a bit more? Is that accurate?
Look, I don't know if it was that. I just felt, and anyone that has followed the work that I've done over the years knows that I'm certainly, you know, I'm not oblivious to the fact that sport and politics collide all the time. So I'm not naive to that. But I don't like it when politics uses a platform for political purposes, you know, because politics comes and goes. Olympics ministers will come and go, prime ministers will come and go. And you've got to keep your vision on that bigger picture. You and I will come and go, but you hope that you leave the place a little bit better off, and having encouraged those that come underneath us who are coming through next to continue to build a planet that is going to be better. And so I just think I didn't agree with some of the ways I certainly perceived that the games were being used for political purposes. And that was at odds with what I thought was my job, which was to feed the global media with information about the Olympics, and to be very honest about those things, whether they were challenges, whether they were success stories, whether it required a shifting in the way things were being done. The more open you can be, the more people come on the journey with you and understand that. And I think, sort of the minister's department and my department were working with different agendas.
Tracey Holmes has joined me. She's a esteemed sports broadcaster heading off to Paris, and she's been to most Olympic Games, bar one, since 1992. And the areas of expertise include purchasing a property, owner-occupied investment. They've got over 25 lenders on their panel now. You missed Barcelona in 2004. That's because you became a mum, which obviously is your greatest achievement in your life, Trace. So that was a little bit of a break for you, and then you got back into it. So,
well, it kind of was, but it wasn't. It wasn't, because even though I didn't go to Athens, I covered Athens for CNN, because by that time, my husband Stan and I and the kids were living in Hong Kong. And I basically, I ended up going on, like I was a regular on their programming out of Hong Kong, covering all the events of 2004. So I wasn't there. So I don't claim it as an event that I covered. But I certainly was very active in watching it and reporting on it. Yeah.
Can I ask you, just back to 2000, were you there when Cathy Freeman won the race? And were you, like the rest of Australia, nervous as a cat in a hot tin roof before the race? And as I still think it's one of the most immortal pieces of commentary, Raelene Boyle going on to what Bruce said, what a legend. What a relief. I still don't think there'll be a better piece of commentary in my lifetime from the great Raelene Boyle. But were you as relieved as she was and everyone else was when Cathy won that race?
Oh, how good was it? I was actually sitting in the stadium. It was phenomenal. And, every time you talk about it, the hairs stand up on end, don't they? Because it was just the most remarkable thing. And, as she ran around the stadium, it was sort of like a different version of a Mexican wave, because as she came past you, it was like the wave of energy from the people in the stadium that were just like urging her on, like, come on, Cathy, come on, Cathy. And every metre that she ran and the crowd that was then equivalent with her around the venue was just so invested in Cathy, and absolutely what a relief when she finished. But, I'm so happy. I've got this moment where when I was at Channel 7, one of the things I had to do was actually in the lead up, before the main stadium had been completed, they just put the track down and they just put the two big screens up, getting ready for the Olympic Games. And they organised for me to walk down the tunnel to do an interview with Cathy. And what we didn't tell her was that she'd won the World Championship. But as we walked down the tunnel and came out onto the track, we'd start beaming her World Championship victory on the big screens. So it would be her first experience walking into the Sydney Stadium, imagining what the Olympics were going to be like. And here's the commentary and the vision of her winning gold at the World Championships. And it was so phenomenal. So we walked down. She had no idea this was going to happen. We're chatting away. The cameras are filming. We come around the corner and I go, these are the big screens that everyone will be watching when you compete here, Cathy. And bang, they started. And she fell down to the ground and she just sat there and she looked up and she was like, just can't wait for the Sydney Olympics. And that was her moment of kind of imagining what the night was going to be like when she actually got to run that race. And I always wonder, I wonder if that had any impact, that moment, her being able to sit there without the pressure of the crowd, to be able to see this venue that was going to be her night in this venue in however many months' time, with nobody in there and no pressure, and to be able to make that her home so that when she came out on the night with the pressure of the country resting on her shoulders, that she'd be able to go back to that quiet moment and do what she knew how to do.
She was very unaffected by it in the lead up, and she's even more unaffected by it in the aftermath. Is that what makes her a special champion, Tracey?
I think all champions are special. That's what makes them champions because, I've often told my children, they're not children anymore, they're adults, but, when they were growing up and they were competing in sport and whatever, I would often tell them at that level, the difference becomes, your mindset and what's here. Because at that level, everyone's good. At that level, physically and ability-wise, any single person in that race can win. And so the difference then becomes, what's that X factor? What's that 1%? What's that thing that makes them stand out from every other, to be able to rise to that occasion? One of the comparisons I make is like Usain Bolt and his ability to kind of march into an arena and suck in the energy of every single person there and just run and enjoy it and smile. And he embraces that pressure. Another character who's another fantastic champion is Michael Phelps in the pool, like the winningest Olympian ever, which is quite remarkable. 28 Olympic medals, 23 of them gold, and a majority of them single, solo events, not just relays. He kind of was of that mindset where he'd put the goggles on and he'd have the cap on and nothing mattered. He could block all of that out. So you've got this incredible champion who was just very good at centering himself on that block and hopping into the pool and just going for it, as opposed to Usain Bolt, who's like, let me suck it up. Give me more, cheer louder. Like me, don't like me. I don't care. I'm using your energy and watch what I can do. And so they all have different techniques on how they deal with it and what they think about in that moment. And that's what has always fascinated me, is the approach that each of these, athletes take into an arena. And it's not always good. Only one person can win in every event. And yet, in so many instances, all of them deserve to win because they've been so phenomenal in dedicating their lives to that moment. And some of them only ever get one chance. So it's a real environment and arena of, riding the highs and the lows. And there's a lot of lows.
Do you have a favourite athlete along those lines, Trace? You don't have a favourite athlete that has inspired you over the years and all the games that you covered in both winter and summer?
Absolutely not. Look, one thing that I think surprises a lot of people is that I prefer covering the Winter Olympics because they're very different people to the Summer Olympians. And, just think about the sports. It's a lot more kind of, they're in the environment. They've got to manage the environment on the day. It could be blowing a gale. It could not have snowed and you've got really crappy slopes to ski on, or it's snowed a blizzard overnight and it's beautiful and there's lots of powder and everyone's having a great time. The winter sports are very different. So it's in the environment and it requires a whole different kind of mindset. You've got to be incredibly adaptable. Whereas I don't think there's a lot of adaptability for most of the summer sports. Everyone that's in a pool, it's indoors predominantly. The track, it's pretty much the same. There might be a bit of wind or not, but you're not dealing with the environment in quite the same way. And so I really like the winter sports. Having said that, there is nothing like a Summer Olympic Games and that pressure cooker. It's a completely different environment. And the pressure cooker of the Summer Games is phenomenal. But yeah, just personally covering the games, I like the winter events.
Australia always tend to fight out of their weight division in Winter Olympics. Is that what makes it more intriguing for you, knowing that, gee, they're up against it here? We've got some good skiers. We've even had some good skiers that come from the Mornington Peninsula and down near Sorrento. There's not too many ski slopes down there, Trace. Of course, there are a few from up near Canberra and obviously up near Thredbo, but because there aren't that many winter sports in Australia that we specialise in. Is that what intrigues you more about the Winter Olympics, that Australia are going in as the rank underdogs most of the time?
Look, not necessarily. And I've always been of the mindset also that, you know, covering an Olympic Games, part of the beauty of covering an Olympic Games is that you're watching the whole world. And sometimes some of the greatest stories don't come from Australia. They come from elsewhere. You know, Eric the Eel.
Yes.
I mean, what a phenomenal story. You know, people that come to the Olympic Games, competing in front of the world in these beautiful venues, swimmers from nations that don't even have pools. So they swim in a river. I mean, that's phenomenal. You know, those kind of stories, they're the stories for me that kind of stand out. And they also put in perspective what it is about Australian athletes that enable them to succeed and to be so good on a world stage. And we often say underdogs, but, you know, if you sort of balance out everything and you look at the facilities that we have, the money that is invested in sport, even our winter training camp, you know, in Italy, that is there full time, that athletes can utilise, you know, when they compete mostly in Europe, because as you say, we don't have all the facilities or the competitions here for winter sports particularly. You know, that gives us an edge, an absolute edge. You know, that gives us a starting position way above so many other countries that compete at the Olympics. And so that's not to diminish it at all. It's just recognising that here in this global village of the Olympic Games, there's a whole lot of different things happening. And, you know, Eric the Eel just finishing a race is the equal to me of whoever it was that won that race, because he had to overcome so much just to get there.
And I think there was a standing ovation for him, wasn't there? I mean, people knew
There
he was
was.
determined to get there, and that's what made it so good. Now, of the Winter Olympics, is there a venue you've liked the most? Because some of them are sort of off Broadway. Unless you're into your skiing and you're into your winter sports, you probably, and they're great places, no doubt, but you probably don't go there, do you?
No, you probably don't. Definitely, if you're from Australia and you're not a skier, you're not going to go there.
No.
Look, it's the same. It's winter and summer is the same in this regard. Every single games gives you something different, because it really is a display of the culture of a place. And you sort of get a sense of the people of that place and the politics of that place, and how they embrace the world and what they feel about the world. So, you know, I was in Sochi in 2014, and not a lot of people have been to Russia. And that was really interesting, you know, just to see how that all unfolded and how the locals reacted to hosting a world event. But, you know, Pyeongchang in 2018, I remember, because it's the coldest I've ever been. It was so cold. And I lived in Beijing, you know, where it can get to, with the wind chill factor, it can get to like -30. It can be pretty cold.
Yeah.
And Pyeongchang, there were some times when I was doing crosses and my mouth wasn't working because my lips wouldn't connect because my face was so cold. I was in Beijing 2022 for the Winter Olympics, and the cameraman took a photo of me. In the end, I had like 3 of my great big thick jackets. I had to wear all of them every night. I'd just rotate which one was on the outside. And he's got a shot of me, and I had, you know, the big fur around the hood on my external jacket. But because it was COVID, we had to wear face masks even outside.
Right.
And that, you know, the warmth of the breath that came out into the mask kept my lips warm, which meant I could talk, but your eyes would water continually because of how cold it was. And I had icicles all through my eyebrows while I was doing my cross. So that was pretty funny. But you remember them for different things, you know, the athletics that you see, what people do with their body and with their implements. You know, if you're talking winter sport, what those, you know, ski cross people can do is, I mean, it's phenomenal. It really is phenomenal. And it doesn't matter which event you go to. Ice hockey, oh my gosh, it's
Great.
it's one of the greatest sports you can be in. It's just incredible. Yeah. So no, they all offer something different.
If I was to ask you the rules of curling, would you know them?
No,
It's
no.
a very strange sport, isn't it? It's like sweeping the floor, but it's fascinating. You can't take your eyes off it, can you?
I don't know what they're yelling about.
No, I don't either.
I mean,
It's
obviously you got to sweep the floor and make sure the ice is smooth, so and the stone can curl this way or that way. But I don't know what all the yelling is.
Yeah.
But fine, go for it. It's great. It makes for great atmosphere. Yeah, I don't know the rules of curling, and I've never tried curling.
No,
For
nor have I.
obvious reasons. I've seen some people who've tried it, and it just looks ridiculous. So I'll leave that to the experts.
Tracey Holmes is my guest, and she's one of the legendary sports broadcasters who's off to another Olympic Games in Paris in 2024. And we're here for Aussie Home Loans. We've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Before I get to London, which some would say was as good as Sydney, I was lucky enough to go to both, and I would probably say London slightly better than Sydney, in my humble opinion. I hope that's not seen as blasphemous amongst other Australians listening to this. But you were there in 2021. It should have been in 2020, but of course, COVID. How interesting an experience was that, Trace?
It was very interesting. It was very odd. And, again, for very different reasons, that game stands out. I refer to it often as the loneliest games.
Right.
Especially when you're talking track and field, because you've got these big venues where normally you've got upwards of 80,000 people cheering on the action, and they were empty. There were very few media. You had to be spaced out, those that were there. And then the athletes, and they looked so small because they just got absorbed into this great massive emptiness. And even when you're on the buses heading to the venue, it was so obvious that we were blocked off from the general public. We weren't allowed to walk through the streets, and there were barricades everywhere, and you'd hop on a bus at the main press centre to take you to the main stadium or wherever else you were going, and you'd see the locals on the street, and they'd turn and follow the bus, and they'd be looking at you through the window, and you just knew they didn't want you there.
Really?
They didn't want the Olympics. Yeah. And that's very hard for everybody. Of course, then you feel like an imposter. It's like, the country doesn't want us here. What are we doing here? I'm glad for the athletes' sake that they had the Olympic Games, even though it was a year late. Credit to the Japanese. They did an incredible, what they did was phenomenal given the circumstances they had to deal with. And in the end, they pulled off great games that nobody saw. Of course, you could watch it on TV, but the public didn't get to enjoy it in the way that host cities normally do.
In hindsight, Trace, do you think it should have been cancelled, put back to 2024? LA put back 2026? Paris back 2026, and then back on parity with LA 2028, and then we go forward.
Look, I think it's extremely difficult to be able to do that. And you think about the cycle, most athletes at Olympic Games only compete at one.
Yeah. And
so you delay that. You've got people who've already committed a lifetime to that one Games, and they'd already had to extend 12 months. Many people thought it should have been, suspended for those 4 years, as you say. I don't think so. Just because of that, you would have denied a generation of Olympians. And in the end, it taught us stuff. It taught us about humanity. It taught us about what could be done in dire circumstances, and they pulled it off. But I don't know what answer you would get if you asked the Japanese, and if they would have been happy to have not have had it at all, or to have had it in another 4 years' time. But I think given the costs and the planning, you can't extend that for another 4 years, because you've already interrupted so many things. You interrupt transport systems, you interrupt flight paths, you interrupt, an Olympic village and keeping people out of universities so people can stay there during the games, and kind of trying to replicate that 4 years hence is almost impossible. And I think most societies would say no to that. Like, we'll have the games, yeah, but not in 4 years' time. So we have to go through this for another 4 years. No way.
How much do you think it affected them financially? And we know that going way back to Montreal in 1976. They're still paying the cost for it. But do you think Tokyo, even though it's a big, big city now, Tracey, do you think that they'll be paying the cost for a long time because of the fact that it was affected so much by COVID?
No, I don't think so. And it'd be very hard actually to separate what was, COVID kind of budget and what was just the Olympics budget, which they could have factored in anyway or had factored in anyway. Obviously, there were costs because they didn't get ticket sales. They didn't get the same sort of merchandise, and a lot of a budget is recouped through that. But, it's a big, strong economy. And if any of them were probably to survive such an experience, I'd say Tokyo would be one of the top ones to be able to do that.
Now, Beijing 2008, our former colleague and great broadcaster Glenn Mitchell said, I didn't go to 2008, but he believed that it was a bit sterile, but had two of the best venues he's ever seen in his life. What's your view on 2008?
Yeah, my view is probably a little bit different, and I worked a lot with Glenn in 2008. In fact, we commentated the opening ceremony together. Yes. And he provided me those beautiful copious notes that you were talking about earlier, like absolutely every detail heading into that. He's
a ripper,
a master at that.
Yeah, he is. The Oracle, we call him, Tracey, the Oracle.
The Oracle, of course. And so I enjoyed working with Glenn, obviously. But, I'd been lucky enough, I'd been living in Beijing before the game. So I saw everything that had taken place. And I also knew, probably more than many people that came in just for the Olympics and who'd never been to China before, how much of a shift had taken place inside that society. And so you have to remember that, it wasn't a place that was wide open to the world. And sadly, it's become a little more cut off since then as well for various reasons, including COVID. But it was really, they were so proud to welcome the world, but they didn't know what to expect from the world because they didn't have much experience in it. And so I understand, this idea that maybe people felt a bit cold or a bit sterile, but I think it was more that the cultures are so completely different. And Beijing is the biggest city. Like, it is so big. If you consider the population of Australia lives in Beijing, and the ring roads are like, if you circle the ring roads now, it's like 200 Ks to get around the biggest ring road. It's enormous. And so if you plop into an enormous city like that, and it's big, the roads are big, the buildings are big, the place is big, you kind of feel that the power of the Chinese, you definitely feel in Beijing. And so that may contribute to a sense of a sterile atmosphere compared to many other games, because you're not going to get the same sort of interaction as in London, where you can walk down the street, or Sydney and say good day to everyone and everyone can answer back. Completely different languages. People were not understanding each other. People were afraid to venture out because they just didn't know what it was going to be like, or what they would encounter around the corner. Those that did, and I was really happy, I took a lot of the ABC team to some places that they never would have seen otherwise, that I knew because I'd lived there, and they really loved those moments because they got to see something different.
2012, I thought London was spectacular. It was done really well, wasn't it? The Olympic Stadium was out a little bit, but there was so much going on, and the fact that the home country did really well. They had a few great days, but it was just one of those very special events, Tracey, wasn't it? In a big city, and as you say, it helped that a lot of the same countries had the same language too.
Yeah, I think so, and I agree with you. I think Sydney had been the best games. 2008 had some remarkable moments, like the opening ceremony and, the gymnast running around the roof of the venue. And I mean, that was phenomenal. That just took opening ceremonies to new levels. But London, I think, surpassed Sydney. And maybe, I always wondered why, maybe they were lucky as well. They had great weather. The people were happy, like Londoners, who apparently notoriously, they're not going to speak to you when you're on a train, but everyone was speaking, everyone was happy, everyone was smiling, very Sydney-like. But I think maybe people didn't expect it to be as good. And it really was. And so they kind of took the cake. I think they did really well. I mean, Sebastian Coe now, he was a star athlete for Team GB back in the day, went on to become a politician, went on to organise those games, and they were remarkably successful. So no surprise now he's in the running to be the next IOC president.
Does he deserve to be the next IOC president? I couldn't think of anyone better.
There's a lot of people that would agree with you.
Yes.
And there's a lot of people that wouldn't. Only because people say, the Olympic Games is about the world.
Yeah.
And how many times do we need a white European man to be in charge if it's all about the world? And that's all we've ever seen. Is it time for it to go elsewhere and to take a bit of a different shape? I mean, that's arguments for others to have, because I don't get to vote. You don't get to vote who the next IOC president is. But these are the sorts of discussions that are taking place now.
Now, going to Rio, and they also had the World Cup coming up as well. So it's a busy time for that country. What did you make of those games? I mean, going to a South American country, I always consider South America to be a very fun continent. Was it a fun games, Trace, in a lot of ways?
Look, yes and no. I think a lot of people were very cautious because of, the crime rate. There was some concerns around the very, very sort of sparse differences. You've got really, really poor people in the favelas, and you've got super rich political elites, and you think, how is this benefiting those that need it most? I think that's a very big question. You don't want to deny Brazil or any country the opportunity to host one of the biggest events on earth, but you just hope that what is left afterwards is of benefit to everybody, not just a particular few. So it was interesting. There was a great vibe. Brazilians certainly know how to put on a show and how to party and to make everybody feel welcome. So there was all of that. But it was incredibly difficult, as you say, coming just a couple of years after hosting the other world's greatest event, the FIFA World Cup. And I think, given any opportunity again, no country would ever say, yeah, we're going to host back-to-back FIFA World Cup and the Olympic Games, because it's just too much of a drain on an economy.
Well, I mean, it'd be challenging, wouldn't it? I mean, even at the best of times, as you say, with the class differences, but to do two of the biggest events, and some would say that the FIFA World Cup might be a bigger event than the Olympic Games, but pretty good effort to actually pull them off.
Yeah,
we don't know
amazing.
They did. How bad it is.
Did. Yeah, and with no major incidents. Yeah. And so in that regard, phew.
I just want to go back to 1996. There were a few incidents in Atlanta. Was Atlanta the right place to hold an Olympic Games in America?
It's so hard to tell, and I guess it depends on how you measure these things. So we know that America changed the way the games were done in 1984 in LA, where they brought the whole kind of corporate structure to it, and sponsors and investment and not government funding. And so this is the thing in America. Most other countries that host an Olympic Games have a big wad of government funding. That's not the case in the USA. So it's very closely linked to whatever corporate structures they can tap into. And so it was always going to be the Coca-Cola Games, as it was. Coca-Cola had been, the sponsor of the torch relay, which at that time went around the world and sort of garnered interest and interaction before the games actually took off. So, there are a lot of questions about it being overly commercial, which a lot of people felt. And in that regard, it kind of, it ate away at the more spiritual nature that an Olympic Games can often, draw out of people. So I don't know if it was the wrong or the right place. It was just, it's a different way of doing things. And you're left with a different kind of overview. But, it was interesting. They had a few hiccups.
Well, they did. I mean, obviously the bomb was a major concern. I mean, that obviously shook a lot of people around. It was a a big news story. I mean, that would have been really concerning for them, wouldn't it? I mean, not a good look, obviously, as well.
No, not a good look, because, security, one thing happens and then you think, well, what's tomorrow going to bring? What's the next day going to bring? Have these people got it together? Why did this happen? How did the guy get in? Like, all of those questions. And they also had incredible glitches with their transport. They didn't have enough bus drivers that knew how to get around, and people were kind of hijacking in the most basic of terms, taking over and saying, I know how to get to the venue. Get out, bus driver, because you've got no idea. We're going to be late for the start. We've got jobs to do. We've got teams to get there. The technology was a concern. There was a lot of reviewing on the part of the IOC after Atlanta 96.
But for Australia, one of the great highlights was Kieran Perkins winning from lane 8. So I don't think we'll ever forget that. I mean, that's up with Kathy Freeman, isn't it? As a Herculean sporting performance.
Absolutely. And I remember walking out when he just scraped in through the heats. And, like you say, he had the last lane because he was the last qualifier. And I was leaving the pool from the heats. And as you walk down the stairs to get back to the media centre, you had a view into the warm-up or the cool-down pool. And I looked in, and Kieran was sitting down the end, and he was slumped against the wall. He's sort of like, you could just feel that weight on his shoulders, and he was sitting there talking to Greg Norman.
Right.
And Greg Norman at that time, he was one of the world's great golfers. He might have even been number one in the world at that time. And I thought, wow, I'd love to know what that conversation is. And then, as you know, he turns around in the final and just goes from last lane, last qualifier, gold medal. Amazing.
Did you know early days, I mean, Jerry's call is one of the great calls of all time, Jerry Collins. Did you know early days, Trace, something special was about to happen here?
No, not at all. Not at all. But, anyone who was at the pool that night, oh my gosh, what a treat. What a treat they had.
Now, these games will be your last for your beloved ABC. You're going to miss the ABC. You've had a couple of reincarnations, haven't you, over the years? But overall, it's been virtually a 35-year career with the national broadcaster, hasn't it?
Well, yeah, there've been some sort of lengthy interludes in between where I've gone off and done it for other companies and other countries, because we lived overseas for 14 years. And so I've been in and out of the ABC, like a family. Once you're part of the ABC family, you kind of feel like you always are. But I'm not doing this one for the ABC. I'm actually doing this one for me.
I thought you were. I knew you'd left the ABC. Excuse my ignorance.
No, that's all right.
But I thought you were doing one more for the ABC. Oh, you're doing it for you.
Yeah.
So
and a lot of people. You don't need to apologise. A lot of people think the same thing. So I'm just doing it for my podcast, and my YouTube channel, and I'll be also sending some radio reports back for ARN, the Australian Radio Network.
Good.
But no, very different. Won't be for the ABC, but I'll be seeing some of my ex-ABC colleagues there for sure.
You will be, although they're not doing it. It's been two Olympic Games that they haven't been doing it. How do you feel about that? I mean, I'm disappointed as a former ABC employee who went to 3 Olympic Games, 2000, 2004 and 2012, that they're not doing it. They may come back in 2028 to try and make sure that they're right for 2032 for Brisbane, but I'm disappointed. How do you feel?
Yeah, I'm disappointed too, because I think, when you look at the charter of the ABC, most definitely the Olympic Games and an Australian Olympic team is something that is part of that charter. And I think the ABC has a capacity to do it well. I know they're expensive, but, we spend, I still talk like I'm at the ABC. The ABC has a big budget, and they can apportion that in ways that they think are suitable. And I don't know how anyone can argue that, especially in radio terms, TV, it's probably, a lot of money, too much money for a broadcaster to be able to pay out, a public broadcaster. But radio, most definitely, I'd love to see the ABC back with the rights for 28 and 32.
So what's your podcast called, Trace?
The Sports Ambassador.
Oh, right. That's why that's your I was able to send that email address to you. The sport, I like it. So have you got a lot of guests already organised, or you'll organise?
Yeah. And I've been doing it since January. So
Right.
I've already had a lot of guests on.
Good.
And you know, I know that when people go to the Olympic Games, they follow their team generally, you know, the
Yes.
nation they're from.
Yeah.
But as I said, I like a whole lot of other stories. And so I'm fairly sure Channel 9 is going to concentrate on the Australian swimming team and
Yep.
all of the Australians competing in every sport. And so I'd really like to focus on some of the other aspects of the games. And one of the things that's always intrigued me since it began in Rio, actually, was the Olympic refugee team. You know, if you looked at all the refugees around the world at the moment, and they had their own sovereign state, it'd be a country of about 120 million people.
Wow.
And so there's a refugee team of 30 plus athletes who are representing those 100 million plus people. And they've got some remarkable stories, you know, speak about overcoming adversity and being focused and wanting to do their people proud. I think I'm going to focus a lot on their stories because just a fascinating group.
Well, there's so many stories to tell, isn't there? It's not just the gold medalists, it's those there for the first time. It's those who've been there to 8 or 10 Olympic Games. I think it's someone like Andrew Hoy has been to 8 Olympic Games and he's missed 2 as well. He didn't have a horse that was quite up to scratch by his own admission in the sport of equestrian. I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? You say that, and you've said it a couple of times, and I have too, that you got 4 years to prepare and you may only get one chance at an Olympic Games, but you've got to admire these people. James Tompkins went to 6. These people that just keep coming back for more year after year. I mean, it's a long, long time, isn't it?
It's a long time. It's a lot of dedication. It's incredible hard work. It's pain. It's grueling. And so all of that is on show, and I give credit to every single person that gets, you know, the ticket to the Olympic Games. They deserve it for sure.
You've still got plenty of time left, Trace, haven't you, to get to LA in 2028 and Brisbane in 2032, haven't you? You're only a young one, aren't
the
you?
Andrew Broadcasting.
I'm calling the Andrew Hoyer Broadcasting, Tracy. Absolutely.
We'll see. We'll see how we go. See if I get through this one. See if I've still got it in me to, you know, keep putting out that effort and the energy and you know, the non-stop. Yeah, I'll be around in 2032, I reckon.
You will be. And have you been to Paris before?
I have. I was there just last year. So I got to catch up on, you know, have a look at how everything was going and the facilities and how the organising committee was going and what it's going to be like watching an opening ceremony going down the Seine River. So I got to soak up a bit of the atmosphere then. And at the time, they were getting ready to do a fashion show under the Eiffel Tower. And I was imagining, you know, that in just a few months' time, now it's only less than a month, they'll be putting the beach volleyball court there in front of the Eiffel Tower. And I mean, that's just, it's going to be phenomenal. Really phenomenal.
I've been to the Eiffel Tower once. That'll be as good as anything. It'll just about be the best venue of the whole games, won't it? Just
totally.
The Eiffel Tower.
Yeah, well, it's no surprise they're the hardest tickets to get, the beach volleyball.
Absolutely. Now, before I let you go, how would you describe John Coates?
Well,
I know plenty of time too, Trace. I have anyway.
I know how I have described him very, very often. And I've actually described him as this to his face.
Yes.
He is Australia's best politician.
Best politician.
He's our best politician. He knows how politics works, not just in this country, but, you know, certainly IOC politics. And that's huge. If you can understand that and play that game to your advantage, well, you're a master because you've got every different political background and landscape going. So, you know, at the moment, he's vice president of the IOC. He's done incredibly well for Australia. If you think about this, the Australian Olympic team, there'll be 460 people going to Paris, but all up, there's about 1,100 people because the rest are support staff for the athletes. That's costing the Australian Olympic Committee $25 million.
Wow.
25 million, not a cent of that is taxpayer money. So, of course, there's been taxpayer money through the Australian Institute of Sport, the Sports Commission, the funding of sports, etc., in the build-up. But actually, the Olympics, that whole thing, that 25 million, comes from the AOC, which doesn't receive a cent of government funding because John Coates did a deal with the government back in 2000, where AOC gets a portion. He basically said, I tell you what, we'll give you our rights, but in return, we get $100 million of the overall, campaign, the money that comes in, and we put that in an investment fund, and that is going to cover our Olympic teams from here on in. And that's what he did.
And you knew he had a great career in Olympic administration when he, along with David McKenzie and Ken Coles, I think who was the chef de mission in 1980, worked hard on those very conservative members of the Australian Olympic Committee to get the vote over the line for the Australian team to go to Moscow. He wouldn't take no for an answer, Trace, would he? I mean, he was amazing all the way back then.
He certainly was. And, Australia always takes great pride in being able to say we've been at every single Olympic game since 1896. The only other country that can claim that is Greece.
Yes.
The founding nation of the Olympics. But and that only happened because of the work of John Coates. And as you say, not many people know the name David McKenzie. He was an IOC member at the time, way back, leading into 1980. And they did. It was a vote of 6-5 for Australians to go. Some athletes decided not to go. They came under great pressure. You had people like Malcolm Fraser, the Prime Minister at the time, saying, no, we should not go. We should be boycotting Moscow. But at the same time, Australia was doing wheat deals with Moscow. It was politics, 100% through that. Anyway, the Olympians went. They marched into the opening ceremony under the Olympic flag.
They did. And just one more before I let you go. Will Russia ever be marching in as Russia again? Or not
they
in the
will.
foreseeable future?
Yeah, I think they will. I don't know foreseeable future, but sometimes these things change pretty quickly. It seems that everything's heading in that direction, and then all of a sudden it's heading back in that direction. So, yes, they will. I mean, Russia's not going anywhere as a country. No. Big geopolitics is going to change and shift, and different things are going to happen, and different relationships will be forged. America's got an election coming up. If Donald Trump is president again, things will change, geopolitics will change. And, in all of that, the IOC really does always try to find a way where most countries compete, because it's not about, trying to let the politics of the day interfere with athletes from every country who are there as equals with athletes from every other.
That's exactly right. Well, Tracey, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. Tracey Holmes has been my guest today, one of the all-time great sports broadcasters in this country, heading off to the Olympic Games in Paris, not with the ABC, but with her podcast, The Sports Ambassador. Make sure you check it out. And, of course, we're here for Dashing Dan's Olympic Adventures podcast for Aussie Home Loans. Podcasts everywhere, areas of expertise of purchasing a property, owner-occupied or investment, building a property portfolio, refinancing, debt consolidation, cash-out construction, pre-approvals, first home buyers, equipment loans, car loans and personal loans. And they've got over 25 lenders on their panel. Trace, have a great time, and it's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Lovely chatting to you, Dan. Thanks for having me.